Coming up next on Art Rocks, a Louisiana opera star and a master of soul join forces to create big sound. A man who has literally written the book on pioneering artist, naturalist John James Audubon, and a visit to the breathtaking grounds of the American Rose Center. That's right here in Shreveport, Louisiana. That's all next on Art Rocks.
Support for this program is provided by Georgia Pacific Port Hudson operations. Like the impulse that drives an artist's creativity, Georgia Pacific's 850 Louisiana employees are driven to produce quality paper products for your home and business. With additional support from the Renaissance Baton Rouge Hotel, centrally located for business and pleasure travel, the Renaissance offers intrigue, style, and southern hospitality. And by the Watermark Baton Rouge. Art, history, and commerce come together in the heart of downtown Baton Rouge at the Watermark, located in the historic Louisiana Trust and Savings Bank building. And by Prescience Point Capital Management, a fact-based private investment manager using forensic investigation to benefit clients. Research with impact. And by Ann Conley Fine Art, with the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and viewers like you.
Hello and thanks for joining us for Art Rocks with me, James Fox Smith, publisher of Country Roads magazine. Let's meet two Louisiana musicians from very different disciplines who have joined forces to create the record Finding My Way Back to Me. Ivan Griffin is an internationally recognized bass baritone who grew up in Slidell. Thomas Dawson is a native of West Feliciana Parish who is now the director of music for the Commodores. Yes, those Commodores who sing Night Shift and Sail On. Both men took a turn to explain how their musical worlds have come full circle.
I had a wonderful teacher by the name of Aldrich Atkins. Dr. Atkins was my voice teacher at Southern. He heard me at a concert in my hometown of Slidell, where my brother and I did a concert as a fundraiser for our home church. And right then and there offered us full tuition scholarships to attend Southern University in music. Dr. Atkins made sure that I had the technical facility in order to do what I needed to do. And the others, the theory teachers, Dr. Walter Craig, Dr. Rebecca Cureau, made sure that I had the theoretical background so that I could understand what I was doing and why.
I grew up right here in St. Francisville, Louisiana, and I was blessed with a situation when I was in junior high school that a lot of people would have thought it was a broken music system. But it was actually a blessing for me because from junior high to my senior year, I think I had 5 different band directors. But each band director instilled something a little different and something unique in me, and that actually gave me a pretty broad perspective.
Far from the shores of my native land, never had family hold my hand. However, wherever I may be, the universe provides for me.
Then when I went to Southern, I got a chance to work with some great mentors like Alvin Baptiste.
I used to play in Ray Charles's band. It was a gas every night.
And Dr. Isaac Greggs, I played in Dr. Greggs' marching band. I was a student assistant band director with that as well, and I marched 4 years. But I played with Dr. Greggs' jazz ensemble. He had a jazz sextet that toured the world. That opened my world. I realized at that point that the world was a lot bigger than St. Francisville and in Baton Rouge. Ivan Griffin, oh my God, what a talent.
I'm alive again. I'm alive in this place. For God alone.
And we knew he had a very special talent as a freshman. He had something really special.
This was back in the 80s, a time when the musical Supper captivated much of the city's attention. The show was produced by dentist and entertainer Dr. Valerian Smith. Both Ivan and Thomas were involved with the production, and both say they learned things from Smith's teaching that they're still benefiting from today.
He taught me more about music than any of my college instructors. And he just became a mentor of mine. I was the music director for his play Supper, and Ivan performed in Supper.
Valerian was a very loving man and very wise man at the same time. Me being 18, 19, 20, he taught me some lessons that I hold dear to this very day. And one of them was a lesson about commitment. He taught me very strongly that once you give your word to someone, people are then counting on you, and you need to hold fast to that.
Upon graduating from college, Ivan would spend the next 3 decades traveling the world stages as an opera singer.
I've performed in a number of places. I've performed in New York. I've been in South Africa. I've performed across Europe, in Italy and Germany, Spain, France, Belgium. I was in Holland, Amsterdam for about 6 weeks. I was on tour. Porgy and Bess. I've performed in La Boheme, Tosca, the Magic Flute. I've done quite a few other things.
Thomas was fulfilling his dreams in a completely different musical genre, soul.
One day I went to a Commodore concert at LSU, and I was a sophomore at Southern University. And I told my cousin Deidre I was with, one day I'm going to be playing with the Commodores. I felt it, I knew it. I used to buy all their records, albums, and learn to play their music. And moved to LA and was doing a lot of studio work when I was in LA. And a producer I had worked with knew the Commodores were looking for another keyboard player. And I got recommended, got the call. This year is my 30th year as their music director as well.
3 decades later, Thomas learned from a friend that a bass baritone by the name of Ivan Griffin was to perform in his hometown, Colorado Springs.
Wow, is he from New Orleans? Yes, he is. I was in college with Ivan, and I went to his beautiful concert. And after that, we started reminiscing about Southern, started reminiscing about the gentleman we both worked with. It was Dr. Valerian Smith.
During that conversation, Ivan and Thomas hit upon the idea of collaborating on a project, and the album Finding My Way Back to Me was born. Some of the songs came from the musical Supper.
This is my first CD, and it's overwhelming. It's been a long time coming. And so I feel like the shackles that I put on myself, which have kept me from doing CDs up to this point in time, have now been released. It's exciting, it's liberating. It's a diverse CD. You hear some pieces that I've written that are more in, some would say, that contemporary Christian style of writing. You hear some pieces that are more jazz-oriented, if you will, very smooth, mellow, easy listening types of pieces. And you hear a piece that is kind of Broadway-esque, if you will, especially in its finale, and it was a part of a musical production that I did.
Whether in good times, whether in bad, whether I'm happy, whether I'm sad, whether in sorrow, joy, or pain, whether in sunshine or the rain.
I'm probably more proud of this than anything I've ever done. Really.
There's no reason to ever be bored in Louisiana because this state is always alive with cultural events and activities. So here's a list of some of what's coming soon to a place near you. To learn more about these and other events in Louisiana, pick up a copy of Country Roads magazine. Another resource, the Art Rocks website features every episode of the program, so just log on to lpb.org and follow the prompts. More than 2 centuries ago, colonial Louisiana caught and then kept the attention of pioneering artist-naturalist John James Audubon. Minnesota journalist and writer William Souder was so fascinated by Audubon's vision, he wrote an acclaimed book on the naturalist that was named a Pulitzer Prize finalist. Let's listen as Souder shares his secret to mastering the art of storytelling.
Here's the secret that every writer knows. Storytelling trumps everything. If you have a good story, a narrative that has a beginning and a middle and an end, and if it also has a strong protagonist, you're way ahead of the game. And so biography is a really natural structure for a storyteller. Biography is wonderful because you start with a main character and you start with a life that unfolds. So it's all about telling a good story and trying to hold the reader's attention. I came out of the University of Minnesota Journalism School in the late 1970s, worked at a number of different newspapers and magazines. So I've written 3 books. The first one was called The Plague of Frogs. That was a work of journalism, and that covered the investigation into these outbreaks of deformed frogs here in Minnesota and other parts of North America. And then my second book was called Under a Wild Sky. That was a biography of John James Audubon, the bird artist. So I was very fortunate with the Audubon biography that it was named a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. And then in 2012, I published my third book, On a Farther Shore, a biography of Rachel Carson. I am now at work on book number 4, which is a biography of John Steinbeck. John Steinbeck is certainly one of the foremost American authors of the 20th century, and he wrote The Grapes of Wrath, Of Mice and Men, East of Eden. He remains one of the best-read American writers. So Steinbeck is very early days right now. I'm still reading and digesting all of Steinbeck and a lot of books about Steinbeck. The plan is to spend about 2 years researching John Steinbeck and about a year writing the book. But in terms of choosing who you're going to write about, I think that the most important thing is it has to be somebody that really you feel a connection with. That because of your life experiences, because of the other work you've done, they kind of fit into your frame of reference in a way that they're kind of recognizable to you. You feel like you know the person. Writing a biography is a huge logistical, organizational challenge. You're going to have thousands and thousands of documents that you're going to be relying on. There's a wonderful biographer named Stacy Schiff who has written about what it takes to be a biographer. She says you need a mild case of obsessive-compulsive disorder and also a high tolerance for archival dust because you're going to spend a lot of time in libraries. Every subject is a little bit different. Every book is a little bit different. But in general, when you're writing biography, you need to identify what kinds of materials you can rely on to tell someone's story. In many cases, there's a paper trail that has been left behind. That often it's correspondence, letters, diaries, and journals. And those, for important people, those tend to be collected in archival collections at major libraries. This extraordinary volume that we are looking at is one of 4 bound volumes that the Athenaeum owns of John James Audubon's The Birds of America. He painted all of his birds at an exact 1-to-1 ratio. They're all life-size. You know, I think I've probably looked at now maybe 15 sets of The Birds of America. They're all a little bit different. Each one is an original. When I started working on Audubon, I, of course, had seen a number of prints of Audubon's work, but I didn't really have an appreciation for the size and the complexity of the project. In addition to that, they are historically extremely important. In many cases, Audubon's record of America from the 1800s is one of the best visual descriptions we have of what the frontier was like and what the animals were like that lived there. You cannot look at these paintings without being moved by them. So if you look at the books that I've written and the book that I'm working on right now, there is a common thread that runs through all of them, and it is this connection to the environment that we all share on Earth. What I like about Rachel Carson and John Steinbeck and John James Audubon is that they are real people, they lived real lives, and those real lives are stories. And they're stories that are important, they're an important part of American history. And when I find a subject that embodies all of those things, then that's sort of the ideal, that's the sweet spot for me.
Survival. It's a recurring theme in artist Cedra Wood's paintings. Based in Albuquerque, New Mexico, Wood creates paintings that combine elements of photography and performance. Here's a look at Wood's creative process.
Ever since I was a kid, I've wanted to present realistic paintings of sort of surreal situations. When I was a kid, these were much less interesting ideas of like things floating in the air. But it's really important to me that the scenes be conceivably plausible, something that someone could actually happen onto. Because things that are that strange, even if not these specific things, exist everywhere all the time. It's all about just stumbling to these things out of context. And I just happen to manipulate them out of context to create a moment. I think of the performance as like sketches, and the performance for me is a lot like photography in that I take a lot of pictures, but I'm not a photographer. There's so much I don't know about photography, and I don't know the history of photography. And I feel the same way about performance. I'm sort of stumbling blind into that. So I don't really feel like I'm contributing to the conversation in any way that's current because I'm not aware of the conversation. I'm just taking these actions in order to bring myself closer to the things that interest me. Often when I start a work, I don't know why the things in it interest me so much. And sometimes I find out later, or sometimes it sparks an interest that I investigate and then it becomes more important later. Part of me wanted to figure out why it was so important to me to make these 1850s ranching costumes out of materials I could find in the plains or in the low mountains. And part of me thinks I don't really want to know until I've made it, because I might realize it's something not that interesting at all. And I don't want to interrupt the process of making it because it feels like something that I need to discover. In this particular set of costumes, there's a lot of extremely tedious activity. I try not to think about the amount of hours that have gone into processing the raw materials, like pounding the yucca or splitting the grass, or any number of other things that have gone into it. Because then I'll think about it in terms of like, oh, what could I have accomplished in so many hours of painting, you know? Why am I doing this incredibly time-consuming thing for what might result in one drawing or painting at the end of it? You know, there's so much you don't know before you start a process. And once you start, you begin to see all the complex ramifications of one tiny task. So I do want to understand the things around me, but I also have this sense that there's so much to understand I could never even begin to predict what there is out there to get, much less get it. And so finding a way to sort of wriggle into a niche where I can expand and butt up against something important is part of the fun. The futility is part of the fun. Knowing that I can only know a very small amount is pretty exciting. But getting to a place where I can see a broader scope or a bigger horizon of what it means to understand is pretty intriguing to me. There's the joy and the interest and the sacrifice of making the thing. And then later, if you're really lucky, there's the chance to have gained something important from it, either through connection with someone else or learning something about yourself or learning something about the place where you live. Well, a few years ago, for the first time, I started using my body to get visual imagery to incorporate into the paintings. My friend and I were out in the desert in Utah at Muley Point, and we'd gone for a walk, and there were very small puddles of water and some little creatures swimming around, which I later looked up and found were tadpole shrimp. But at the time, I was just really amazed that anything could survive out there. And so I wanted to go back the next day and draw them. And when we got there, the water was completely gone. There was just mud caked to the bottom. But there were little, not shells, but some sort of like skin casing on top to indicate that the animals were still living in there, so that when there wasn't water, they just sort of went under the mud to survive until the next wet spell, and then they'd get up and swim around some more, I presume. And I liked the idea of trying to adapt those survival tactics for myself. I'd gotten really badly sunburned a couple of days before, and I thought it would be kind of fun and interesting to bury myself completely and see how that worked as a survival tactic, even though I knew, my body wasn't the same. So my friend Lauren Greenwald, who documented it for me, helped to bury me, which was a really extensive process. I'm face down, and I've got like a little cavern of air here that I could, breathe through, but my hair was on top, sort of forming the shape of this, echoed form of the tadpole shrimp. And after this became more and more significant for me, and I started thinking about the different ways that we try to understand each other as people, how difficult it is to communicate even the most basic things, and the gulf between us and each other, the gulf between us and animals which are like us, the gulf between us and animals which are really unlike us, and then plants and the environment in general. And so I genuinely wanted to connect with other animals and people, and at the same time recognize the folly in trying to bridge that gap by trying to imitate the way they communicate or survive. I went to Australia the year after that and found myself thinking a lot about invasive species and the roles that they play, with the idea of forcing myself to get really close to this thing that was really unwanted in this area that, if people had their druthers, would be eradicated maybe. The idea of camouflage comes up a lot. In the same series as the Patty Mellon performance I did, a piece where I tied calla lilies all the way around myself, with this idea of sneaking up on other people who are in the scene, this idea of involving myself without imposing. And of course it's completely ludicrous. It's obviously a girl with flowers wrapped around her. No one's being fooled by this. But that fascinated me even more. I like the idea of a failed camouflage in the same way that I like the idea of failed communication. It brings up questions. Why would I want to hide? If I just follow these impulses through and I do pieces about why I want to be invisible, then I have to ask myself why that's interesting to me. I guess the experience of trying to understand roles in the environment by processing them in this visual way is that I've realized there is no answer at all, and any one that one comes up with is permeable and fluid and temporary at best. It doesn't keep me from looking, but it makes me aware that there doesn't have to be an answer. Even if there were one, I wouldn't necessarily have to find it, nor would the viewer. It's the act of thinking about it that's important to me.
We're closer to home now for this week's Louisiana Treasures segment. It's about the American Rose Society's gardens in Shreveport. The site encompasses 118 acres of rose bushes, more than 20,000 plantings in all. Laura Seabar tells us about the Rose Society, its grounds and plans for the future.
The gardens that we are in right now is the American Rose Center, which is actually the national headquarters of the American Rose Society, which is 126 years old. We've been in Louisiana for about 45 years now, but we have been in the United States for 126 years. In 1986, people from Louisiana, Senator J. Bennett Johnston and really his wife Mary, along with Lindy Boggs, worked to push through a resolution to have the rose named the national floral emblem. And November 30th, 1986, Ronald Reagan signed a declaration declaring this. When you think of an emblem for the United States, it would be like the eagle is one of the United States' emblem, and the rose is the national floral emblem. And as the American Rose Society, it is our job to tell the story of our national floral emblem. The U.S. Postal Service just did a national release ceremony for their newest stamp, which is the Peace Rose stamp. This stamp means so much to our organization because we're very involved in this. The Peace Rose came to be during World War II because one of our members who lives in France had hybridized a new rose, and one of our members in America took this rose and saved it, took care of it during the war whenever the Maillon family in France was busy using their gardens to feed people. We were able in America to grow the rose, and so once the war was over, we named the rose the Peace Rose. In 1974, when we first opened our gardens, we worked with a company called Commodores Roses from Germany, and they donated a rose and we named it for the city that we had just moved to. So we have a beautiful rose called the Shreveport Rose that is planted in our garden as well. The rose behind me is very special, especially to the state of Louisiana. This rose is called the Peggy Martin Rose, and it was recently named since Hurricane Katrina. Peggy's parents sadly lost their lives in Katrina. Their house flooded and they were home when this happened, and during the cleanup the only living thing that they found around the entire house was this one rose vine. And so they did some research and found out that this rose hasn't been classified. She actually worked with Dr. Welsh, Dr. Bill Welsh from Texas A&M, and that name was then named Peggy Martin Rose, which is also known the Katrina Rose, and it's really known because it grows so fast and so big. It's a climbing rose that spreads wide. It's a very big favorite around the country, not just in Louisiana. We are looking towards the future, and so we are in the middle of a great garden restoration to lean into our 50th anniversary of the national headquarters being in Louisiana. So we are thrilled. We have a national rose company named Jackson and Perkins who has, they are sponsoring the design of our new garden, and this new garden is going to tell the story of roses in America through time. The garden is now known as America's Rose Garden and will be a national tourist destination right here in Louisiana. The inspiration behind the shape of this design was actually the inside of a Rolex watch. And so the gardens that you will be walking through are circular and will reflect the movements of a timepiece. Now our new America's Rose Garden is a 3.5 acre area that's going to be all roses. We currently have about 7,000 roses.
And that's going to do it for this edition of Art Rocks. But remember, you can always watch episodes of the show at lpb.org/artrocks. And meanwhile, Country Roads magazine makes another great resource for learning what's going on in the arts all across this state. So until next week, I'm James Fox Smith, and thank you for watching.